Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined-up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Yes, hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 83 with Sheena Kamal, a Canadian crime writer with a tough outsider heroine in Nora Watts. Sheena has got a really interesting backstory from a career in TV and film, research, through screenwriting, and then onto a successful series of crime novels. There'll also be time for another trip to Book Bloggers Corner with Emma Rose Hollands reviewing The Hope and Anchor by Julia Kite. Before we get cracking with all that stuff, a little update from me. Still pushing on with the latest edits to the novel, and I got some very detailed and thoughtful feedback from a beta reader this week. It's given me a lot of food for thought and stopped me in my tracks a little bit, if I'm honest. It's not that it's all negative stuff, it's actually mostly positive, but there are a few things I need to digest and process before I can properly address them. It's funny because in today's interview, Sheena mentions that she doesn't really use beta readers at all because they don't work for her and they can sort of get inside her head. As she says, the novel is a very fragile thing, and I suppose it can be easy to get derailed. There are certain things I'm very confident I've got right, the main one being the characterisation of my protagonist, Mickey Blake. It's told in first person and I feel I know Mickey inside out, but there is one incident early in the book that more than one reader has struggled to understand what motivates Mickey to behave in the way that he does. I haven't really got any qualms about it, but the fact that it's been flagged by more than one person might mean I need to drop just a couple more clues in there, or maybe the readers just can't relate to him at that point. He's not a nice person, especially at the beginning of the book, and it's my job, I guess, to take the reader on that journey. So, as I say, lots to think about, but I'm not really going to do anything too drastic until this pass of the edit is completed. But what about you? Do you use beta readers or some other form of critique for later drafts of your manuscripts? How do you deal with feedback? I'd love to hear your experiences, so tweet me at JU Podcast or Mr. Kelly to you, and I'll try to give you a mention in a future show. Right, let's get to the main course and my chat with Sheena Kamal. Sheena was born in the Caribbean and moved to Canada as a child. She holds an HBA in political science and was awarded a TD Canada Trust scholarship for community leadership and activism around the issue of homelessness. She's had a really varied career, including working as a film and TV extra, an actor, researcher, and even as a stunt double. The Lost Ones, or Eyes Like Mine as it was known in the UK, was her debut novel, and the sequel, It All Falls Down, was just released by Zafra in the UK in June 2018. Okay, Sheena, thanks a million for joining us on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about how you came to writing in the first place and give us a flavour of some of those jobs that you've done before you got around to writing the first novel. I know you've had a really interesting kind of career to date.
Yes, I came to writing in really the most roundabout way. I think I've always loved writing and just have been able to do it and to express myself in that way. But I never really took it seriously. So I did my degree in political science, and then after that, I wanted to be creative, and I hadn't thought about writing at all at that time. I went into acting, and I did some commercial work, and I became an actor even before I was trained to do it. So it's sort of I played a lot of catch up there. And then I got into,
Sure, yeah.
And then I got into screenwriting because, acting was great, but it wasn't enough for me. I wanted to create my own stories. So I did, tried to be a screenwriter, did a lot of, admin stuff in the film and TV world, did some research. And then I realized that I wasn't being seen, that I had this, wealth of, storytelling ability in me. And it really screenwriting wasn't it for me. So that's when I just decided to quit my job and take off and, write it.
And it kind of went from there. So you mentioned there, you want that desire to kind of create your own stories, especially, as it started off, it was screenplays and you were looking at screenwriting. Was that motivated by anything in particular? Was it a case that you weren't seeing stories sort of reflecting your own life experience and your background?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to be an actor because you're, when you do train for it, you take on any kind of role that comes your way. But the reality of the industry is that, a lot of things are family based. There's not a lot of diversity, and I, it's such a depressing conversation, diversity. But that's the truth, right? So
yeah, sure.
I wasn't able to go out for the parts that I really wanted, and maybe I wasn't good enough. I don't know, but I know that sometimes you need that chance, and I just never had that chance. So when it came to screenwriting, I wanted representation, and so my main character in my suspense series, she is not of my background. She's of a different background, but she's still sort of someone that you don't really see on the page or on screen either. So for me, it's not really about myself so much as it is about the people that I see around me.
Yeah, sure. And that idea of just somebody that's maybe, as you say, although they don't mirror your exact background, it's that idea of being a bit marginalised or a little bit out of the mainstream, for want of a better phrase. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what became your first book, which I know has got two different titles depending on whether it's in the US or the UK. So it's Eyes Like Mine or The Lost Ones, I think it is in the US. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and a little bit more about that main character you mentioned, Nora Watts there.
Sure. So Eyes Like Mine is about a woman who discovers that the child she'd given up for adoption many years ago has gone missing. And now she's got to delve into the very dark events of her own past in order to figure out just what happened to this girl who is a child she's not sure she wanted to exist in the first place. So it's a very dark thriller. It's set in the Pacific Northwest, very gritty streets of Vancouver and going into the snow-capped mountains of the interior and, the rugged island of Vancouver Island, I don't know if you've ever been to Tofino or Ucluelet, but it's this like wild, beautiful, incredible place. So the story really moves and uses the region to inform this person's journey. And Nora herself is a person who is she's of mixed heritage. She has had a very troubled life, and she's one of those people that doesn't feel seen, has never felt seen. And she was in the arts as well. She was a blues singer. So when we meet her, she hasn't sung for a long time. And so the story is really about her confronting her past and her getting back to this sense of a place of healing maybe, or at least kind of embarking on that journey.
It sounds great, and as you say, sort of very complex character. So did the character come before the story, or did you get kind of a kernel of a story first and then develop the character? How did that come about?
It was the character first. I was doing research for a TV series in Toronto, and this idea came to me about a woman who was unseen, and she was a mother but didn't actually choose to become a mother, and so that sort of came with its own baggage. And when I realized that she was a blues singer, that opened up the story. Like everything sort of fell into place when that particular part of her story came to me. So it was really always about the character.
I mean, as you say, you have got a different background to your character, but how much of your own background and experience do you think sort of feeds into Nora?
I think for me, there's this idea, and I didn't know this when I was writing the.
No, it's often not a conscious thing, is it? It just kind of comes out over the course of the writing.
Right, yeah, and even after I'd written the book and it had been published, I didn't really know. But I think for me, what had happened is that I am from a diasporic community, so I am South Asian, but from Trinidad, from the Caribbean, and so it is in that that experience of being kind of not being the culture that I present as, and not ever feeling connected to the South Asian culture. And sometimes, I'd really wanted to in the past, but it just, I never did. So there's a sense of a lack of belonging and a lack of cultural connection that's really followed me throughout my life. And that's Nora's story as well, is that she presents as a cultural identity that she doesn't have a connection to, because she lost her parents and she doesn't really know, and people judge her by her appearance and what she looks like to them, and all of those prejudices that kind of come with that, but she doesn't feel it, she doesn't know. So it the reason I think that I initially went there was because I wanted her to feel like an outsider. So when the girl, her daughter goes missing, she feels like she's got no one to turn to, and she's got to look for this girl herself. And the troubled loner, the outsider character, is very big in crime fiction. So that really fit. But after I published the book, I realized, okay, so this community stuff, this not feeling like you belong, and that your culture is just not something that's for you. That's me.
It was a form of therapy without you realizing it.
Yes, and that's what writing is, actually. Writing is, I find, a form of therapy. If I write it, not that it doesn't upset me later, or I'm completely worked through it, but it doesn't have the same kind of power.
Sure. I mean, crime fiction in particular is a great genre, isn't it, for exploring, well, all sorts of different kinds of things, but it gives you that opportunity to kind of look at those parts of society that we don't often get to look at necessarily. Yes, absolutely. It's an unflinching look often. And so did you always intend to write a series, and if so, what kind of challenges has that brought? Now your second book's just about to come out, which we'll talk about in a sec. No, actually, I just because I didn't really know anybody in publishing, and maybe I had one friend, but it's not like you can share agents or anything like that. So I was really quite new to publishing. So I don't know what my intentions for the book was, but I knew I had to try and get it out there, and so I went and I pitched at a big conference, got an agent. And then one day she called me and she said, "Do you see this as a series or just a one book thing?" And the timing was really interesting. So I said, "Oh, well, I think it's a trilogy maybe." And she said, "Great, I need you to right now send me a little paragraph on the other two." And I did not have a paragraph on. So then I was in the mall at the time, and so I just had to stop and pull out my laptop and just come up with something on the fly. And so you managed to do it. I mean, had it occurred to you at all at the time, or was it one of those moments in life where you could sort of tell by the way that she was asking that it was quite important that you probably had a follow-up or something? Right, I could tell by the way she was asking. Yeah. So you just thinking on your feet. You've obviously worked in television, so you have to do that a lot anyway. Absolutely. And the thing about film and TV is that you've got to be able to distill an idea into one or two sentences. So that was a great experience for me coming into writing novels, because if I have a good idea, I can now just tell you what it is exactly, and it comes from that. So I really just sat in the mall and came up with what we call a logline.
So
Yeah.
so just came up with a log line for each of them and just sort of filled it out a little bit and sent it off.
Yeah, because the log line, we've talked about log lines before on the show, and obviously it's kind of a screenwriting term. It's not bandied around as much in publishing, but it's really, really useful technique. It's because I dabble with screenwriting as well myself, and I remember when I read Save the Cat, and the big section about logline in there, and as I was reading it, I thought, well, actually, this is a really good way to just distill my novel. And I think it actually helps you when you're writing it, doesn't it? To go back to sometimes, when you're deep in the middle of a first draft and you might be, you can't see the wood for the trees and all that kind of thing, and you can just go back to that initial idea and go, hang on a minute, what is the core, essence of the story, and can stop you going off the beaten track too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find, the log line is really helpful because that's an elevator pitch. And then I usually go forward and I develop a little bit of a synopsis, which is a paragraph. And then I'll do an outline, so like a film outline, and I'll keep that to about 5 pages. So no matter what happens, and I will divert from that outline wildly during the writing, but if I get stuck, I know that I can always go back to it and see how I plotted the thing, so to see if I can actually get myself back to where this is supposed to go.
Yeah. So, and do you think that's something that kind of way of approaching it, do you think that's something that you picked up from the stuff that you learnt with the screenwriting?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's been very helpful to me. And like I said, I don't always stick to the outlines. Actually, I don't often stick to outlines, but it's good to have it because at least when you're starting off, you're not starting off with a blank page. You do have some kind of plan. And so I start with the outline and a character and an initial problem. And so that's how I kind of find my way through writing a whole book. So
obviously it became a series, or maybe it'll be a trilogy, who knows. So on the basis of that, tell us a little bit about your latest book, It All Falls Down, which I think was released in June, is that right?
Yes, end of June, I believe, in the UK. It All Falls Down follows the story of the main character from Eyes Like Mine as she encounters a veteran from her father's past, and what happens is he casts doubts on her father's death, which she previously thought was a suicide. And in speaking to him, she begins to, question whether or not it was a suicide. And so she goes to Detroit to look for information about her father's life in order to shed some light on his death. And he grew up in Detroit, so it sort of takes her to this crazy city where she's looking for the truth about her dad's past, and ends up getting into a whole heap of trouble because it's Detroit, and that's what you do there.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Obviously, it's a big change because you often find, somebody that, especially when they sort of establish a series, and it's kind of often very strongly linked to a particular location. So what made you change location? Was it just a case of that came up in the story, or you just really wanted to write about Detroit?
I think it came up in the story, but also I find Detroit very interesting, and so I know that for me, place is really important. I'd moved to Vancouver to write the first book, so I had actually changed locations in order to pursue a career in publishing or in, novel writing. And there was just something about Detroit that I felt and that I wanted to look at.
So for people, particularly UK audience, some people won't be that familiar with Detroit. So just give us a bit of a flavour. What kind of city is Detroit? What drew you to it?
Detroit is the Motor City. It had a big industrial revolution of sorts, and then big population expansion, and then but it was always a tough city, and it has a reputation kind of like Chicago for gun violence and poverty, and it's just a really rough place to live. And then there was a recession, and the population contracted, and everyone who could leave did, and their manufacturing sector just collapsed. So there's an extreme income inequality in Detroit. There's a big music culture there. So you know, blues music, it was the home of Motown. So it really just has this interesting history, and I liked it. I liked it, and even though it was dangerous, you know, when I first drove through there, I thought, oh well, what an interesting place, and perhaps maybe it is a bit of a misunderstood place, and I knew that there was something there.
So how did you approach the research for that, or was it somewhere that, did you live there for a while, or was it a case you just visited and you did a little research? How did that come about?
Well, I hired a private investigator.
As you do.
As you do. And I went there for 5 days, and it turned out my private investigator there was some sort of miscommunication, and he was actually an active police investigator. So
right.
He picked me up from the bus station, because I took the bus in from Toronto, and he said, oh, you know, we just got a lead in our cold case. Do you want to come with me? You know, and it was their first break in 2 years, so they had to kind of rush off and you know, do this witness interview. And I thought he was just going to park me in headquarters and, you know, leave me at reception or something. But he actually took me around, and I met everybody, and I got to listen in on the witness interview, which was insane. So the time that I was in Detroit, I hung out with this task force, and I was able to, you know, go along with them. I had a bit of an escort, police escort. It was crazy,
but great. I should imagine, as a writer.
Yes, yeah, and the thing is, though, is that I don't really write from the police perspective. So if I was doing a procedural, it would have been, you know, it was gold anyway, but it would have been even, I think, more in depth. But I wasn't. I was looking at it from the other side, and Nora is a character who does not trust the police. So it was really interesting for me as a writer to go and see that other side and to try and understand it, and in that way maybe humanize what I was, you know, trying to do there in the first place.
So I understand that one of the things that's kind of in the background of It All Falls Down is this thing called the 60s scoop. So tell us a little bit about what that is, first of all. How did you find out about it, and kind of when did you realise it was something that was going to feed into the novel?
Right. Well, the 60s scoop was a policy of forced family separation. So kind of like what the States is going through right now, but with their Indigenous population. So it was an extension of the residential school policy, where kids of Indigenous heritage were taken from their families and their communities and forced into residential schools. And that was deemed cruel, and the residential schools were, you know, one by one closed down. The 60s scoop was kind of a political extension of that, where kids were taken and adopted out of their communities. So I had already decided that Nora's dad was going to be Indigenous and he was going to be adopted. And it was through the writing these books that I you know, put together the time frame and realized, oh my gosh, you know, if he had been adopted in this time frame, he was part of this forced adoption policy. And it is as cruel as what's going on in the U.S. right now with separated families. It's, you know, and there are historical roots for it because that happened in the U.S. as well. So, it really affected me. And
you managed to, obviously, this was proved a fascinating backdrop for what is essentially a thriller story, isn't it?
Yes.
so we don't want to forget that. We're talking about, obviously, all this social injustice, but obviously at the heart of it, there's this enticing kind of thriller story.
Yes. Well, I mean, I hope so. I hope it's enticing. But it's really, you know, that's the thing that crime fiction can do. You know, it can give you, you know, a very little personal story, but set it in what is contemporary or what is relevant to you. So
you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. You mentioned, you give us a kind of a hint of what happened when you actually became published. But just tell me a little bit more about that. So in terms of when you wrote that first novel, and I mean, was it actually your first novel, as in the first novel that you wrote? Because often people's first novel that they get published is not necessarily the first novel that they wrote. But was it that the case for you?
Yes, it was. And I wrote the book, and I did a little bit of a revision. And then I went to New York to Thriller Fest. They have in New York.
Sure.
Called Thriller Fest. They have it every year. And there's a pitching forum where you can pitch to agents.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. I took this book that I'd just written. It took me about 8 months to write it, and then maybe a month to just do a quick edit on it, and then I pitched to agents, and I happened to get my first choice of the agents that were there, and then within, I don't know, I would say about 4 months of signing with her, I had a book deal. I had 4 book deals.
Fantastic. So,
Yeah.
And how were you were you nervous about pitching to the agent, or is that something that you're fairly confident with anyway?
I'm fairly confident with it, just because I do have that performance background. So it was like an audition, and
Sure.
the key to auditions is that you have to be prepared, but you also have to recognize that the people that you're auditioning for. So in this case, in the Pitch Fest, I guess, world, it's an agent. So you're really talking to an agent. These are people in the world who want to be, blown away by you. Mm-hmm. So there's no need to be super nervous. There's no need to, put all this extra stuff on them. You really just need to have a conversation. And that friendly, casual approach is, lessens your nerves, and it also lessens their nerves as well. So you're able to actually get in there and be a real person with a great story.
So I suppose the audition process really stood you in good stead as regards that.
Yes, absolutely. So it taught me too that whatever gives you confidence going into a room, do that. So for me, this might be a little silly, but I know that if I get a blowout, which is a thing that women do with their hair, where you go and you don't get the haircut, you actually wash.
I'll take your word for it. Obviously, I'm of the opposite gender, but also I have no hair, so I can't relate to this. But carry on.
Blowout is basically a blow dry that makes your hair bouncy and shiny.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
For reason that makes me feel really good. So So that was my little trick that I did. The morning before, I went and I got a blowout, and I had my little script, right, and I worked it like a script, so I knew what I was going to say, and I just put it all away and just sort of walked in with my hair bouncing, and I felt really great, and I think that sort of that showed through. So no, they all went really well. I pitched 9 people, and all 9 of them requested a manuscript. So that was really great. And again, the film stuff came in handy because I had a log line, and I had a bit of a synopsis, and then I had a little blurb on who I am. So I had about a page of just written material that I had memorized and worked like I would have worked a script. So, if I said something wrong, if I, went off on a tangent, I always knew how to find my way back, because that's what you do when you get a script, is that, even if you miss a word or you do something wrong, you always have to find your way back to the scene. So, it was just a page, and I had those 3 parts, and I knew them really well, and was able to make them conversational. And so that was pretty strong, because the logline element for the book was strong. So I know, because they use it in my publicity for the book, like the exact.
That's good.
They use it. So I know that there was something there. So it's really just about being prepared in the correct way, making sure that you feel good, and going in there and making a real connection.
Right, let's take a quick break there for this week's Book Bloggers Corner. And this week, Emma Rose Hollands reviews The Hope and Anchor by Julia Kite.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
I don't know if The Hope and Anchor by Julia Kite will appeal to everyone. But as a young woman recently out of university, facing the realities of independence, this book didn't just grab me. It hooked me, pulled me under, and took me into the depths of London like I'd never been taken before. The Hope and Anchor is about Neely Sharp. A failed academic turned frustrated office drone, she's able to withstand her boring life thanks to her girlfriend, Angela. But when Angela suddenly goes missing, Neely finds herself tasked with piecing together the hidden life of the working class, epileptic and quietly devoted woman she loves. In search of answers as to what happened to her girlfriend and why, Neely scours the city of London, from parks to pubs to sewers in a snowstorm, as the two women's networks of friends, family and old adversaries intertwine. The first thing I have to say about this book? If you live in London, the accuracy of these descriptions will terrify you. And I don't just mean getting the place names correct or mapping the underground routes. The spirit of every place in London has been captured in these pages. From the uneasy haze falling over East London to the quiet and dangerous serenity of the Thames, you can tell that the writer is not only in love with London, but obsessed with it. I'm also happy to say that the characters are equally as layered and colourful. The main character, Neely, is very much a fish out of water. You find yourself liking her, even when, as the story goes on, you realise that she's a little too obsessive about what she thinks a London life should be. Funnily enough, I began this story liking her over the enigmatic Angela, but by the end, I actually sympathised with Angela much more than I expected to. The book is not without its faults, the main one being its long, beating around the bush narrative voice. Particularly when we follow Neely's point of view, I would find a handful of sentences that my writer brain would instantly want to edit down. Perhaps it was to further show Neely's idealistic way of looking at the world, but I think the roundabout way of explaining things slowed down the story's pace in some areas. However, despite a few hiccups of pace, this book is incredibly engrossing. Being a young 20-something woman, the characters and their story struck a chord with me. The inner struggles of identity, love and ambition that both the women face tugged at my heartstrings. If you're looking for a mystery that will tug at your heart, or want to read a real labour of love to London, then I reckon you should give this book a try. Even now, I find myself mulling over the final few pages. This book spoke to me more than I thought it would, and I sincerely hope it speaks to you too.
Book Bloggers Corner.
There you go, The Hope and Anchor by Julia Kite, reviewed by Emma Rose Holland, and you can find Emma's reviews and blogs at whywordswork.wordpress.com and follow her on Twitter at ERHollands. Right, let's get back to my chat with Sheena Kamal, where we talked about what happened after Sheena was signed by an agent. So once you, as you say, your manuscript got accepted, and did then the process begin of revision? How did you find that?
I found it to be a hellish nightmare. Ethnic proportions. So I did one edit for my agent before she sent it out to publishers, and then when it got accepted, there is a revision process that you go through for that. And, for the first book, it didn't take that much. It took maybe one to two passes to get that. So after I submitted to my agent, I reworked the book 3 times in total. And then that went to print. Mm-hmm.
And what sort of revision? You said it. I know it's slightly tongue in cheek, but I could probably appreciate that it is quite a difficult situation. What sorts of edits did you get back? Were they structural? What sorts of? And presumably some of it was subjective. It was where their thoughts they had on the story or the characterization, was it?
Right. So nothing on the characterization, just because it's told in a first person narrative. So the voice, I mean, I think that the voice of the books is what really kind of got me as far as I did. It was structural, and there were certain parts that were a little bit overwritten that were not central to the mystery. And there's a thing in crime fiction as well, is that a lot of crime books, most of them actually, they have two cases. So they have the one big case that is the major one, and they've got another one in the background that's
like a B plot line almost.
like, yes, exactly. So it's like a B plot line, and that's so my B plot line maybe didn't need to be as big as it was. So that's so I had to kind of scale that down, and just a little thing, little things that I glossed over in the initial writing of it that I had to go back and fine tune. I think there's a difference between working with a UK editor and a US editor. The US editors are a bit more involved in, like, they'll do the line edits as well as structural edits. So I love working with an editor. I wouldn't, I don't have beta readers. I don't send, my books to friends to read beforehand unless a friend has expressed interest, but it's not, to get their opinion or anything. Like, I leave everybody else out of my head and work with one or two professionals who are part of my team. So that's kind of, yeah.
And why is that, do you think? Why you that sounds like something you're kind of committed to, you feel very strongly about, and it's something that you obviously knew from the get-go that you didn't want to do. Why do you think that is?
I think when you let, and this is just what works for me,
Sure.
but when you let too many people in your head, it can shake your confidence, because this is very subjective. So, to have somebody read it and be like, oh, well, I don't know about that part, and then someone else saying, oh, well, I don't know about this other part. It's a very fragile thing, writing a book, and
it is, yeah.
People read it, right? So I'm very careful about who I let into my head. I just know it's so easy to have your confidence shaken in any artistic industry. So you have to toughen up a bit as well, but it's also, you got to trust the people that you're letting your precious little baby out to, right? So
sure, yeah. And what did you you mentioned, obviously, so when you work with your editors, your UK and US editors, are there occasions, I'm guessing there has to be, the law of averages, that they come back with something and you are kind of, you resist it, or that you've got strong feelings about it and you kind of have to argue your case a little bit?
Very rarely. I usually agree. And this is what I mean about having
trusted.
I really trust. So if they bring something up, I know it is a serious issue, and I will take it very seriously. And I pretty much adjust the thing that they say needs adjusting, because I'm not perfect, right?
No, who is? Yeah.
Yeah, no one has read it before then. Actually, that's not true. It all falls down went through 2 sensitivity readers before they went to my editor, and that's just because I'm writing outside of my ethnicity. So I hired 2 sensitivity readers to just go through specific parts of the book, just to flag anything that may have been culturally inappropriate, that I may have gotten wrong, so that I can reassess. But and a couple of the things that they said, I questioned, but I also, same with my editors, I listened and I did my best to adjust in order to have the best possible book. So that's the thing too, is that when your editor kind of comes back to you, it is your book, but they are on your side. And
of course, yeah.
Yeah, they want the best book, that they can, that they can push and out there, and that they really are behind. So everybody, it's like a team effort. You're sitting there and you're writing and you're all alone and you feel like everyone hates you. But the truth is that your publishers, they want to love your book, and they do. It's helpful to learn how to work with them constructively and not be a diva.
Sure. And was that like a big shift for you when you actually got signed? And I should imagine it's in stages. So when you got signed to the agent, obviously is the initial step. When that process began, did you start to think, okay, now I'm actually part of a team? Did that, kind of buoy your confidence and make you feel a little bit more positive?
Yes. Yeah, it took a little while to understand that I was a part of a team.
Mm-hmm.
And once I did, it became a bit easier. And also, it's easier communication-wise. So I work really hard. It's like a marriage. It's like the marriage of my life. To understand that communication is the key to my publishing relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Never go to bed on an argument. Yeah.
Never go to bed on an argument with my editor. No, but it's true. I work really hard to make sure that there are no misunderstandings, that we're on the same page, that even if there is a bit of a criticism, I understand where it's coming from, and I'm actually trying to see what they're saying as opposed to letting my ego do any kind of talking. So that's been a bit of a learning curve, but it's been great. I've been blessed. I have great teams on both sides.
Excellent. Well, it's obviously working for you. The second novel's just come out. What can you give us a bit of an idea of what's coming next? Are you working on the next book?
Yes. So the next book is going to be all about revenge. It is a revenge story.
It sounds good. And have you started writing it already? Mm-hmm. Excellent. How far along are you with the drafting process?
It's pretty far along. I'm not sure how much I can talk to.
Sure. I know you can't reveal the plot probably, but you're doing okay with it.
I'm doing fairly well with it. Yeah, we'll see.
Okay, so where can people find more about you and your work online? How can they connect?
I have a website. It's www.sheenakamal.com. And I'm on Instagram, although I'm really terrible at social media.
Probably too busy writing, to be fair.
Yeah, that or just I don't really know how to do it right. I'm old. I don't know.
Oh, I doubt that. Okay, well, I'll put that all in the show notes as well. So, you're on Instagram and you've got your website as well, which has got lots more information. And I'll put links to your books, obviously. And I think you're hopefully going to hang around a little bit for the epilogue. I've just got one little question I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about research. But for the time being, Sheena, thanks a million, and thanks for joining us on Joined Up Writing.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thanks again to Sheena, and you can find her books on Amazon and all good book stockists, as well as more information on her website, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That pretty much wraps things up for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts from to have the show downloaded automatically every week. And also don't forget that you can get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments, and you can tweet me with where you're listening to the show and why you enjoy it, and I'll give you a mention in a future show. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up